Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me all right and it all works. So thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you for joining my lecture today. And now I'm going to talk about cyberbullying, cyber violence. Let me show you a catalog which is probably not complete because the forms of cyber violence keep emerging and they seem unlimited. But these are the main categories as I see it. So flaming, where flame wars, when we have people calling each other names, disrespecting each other, harassment, when there is usually one victim subject to harassment by a group of other people using nasty comments. We have impersonation, identity theft. There is another form of violence called outing, when you know a fact about a person that they don't want to publish, and those facts are published on social groups, on websites, somewhere where everybody can read it. We have cyber stalking, we have happy slapping. That's a form of violence where the group actually cheers when somebody is being subject to something wrong, and they oftentimes like to film it and display it online. We've got denigration by fabricating some content or publishing degrading content, and we have digital exclusion. This is the case, for example, when somebody starts a group forum and excludes one person from that group so that they don't know what's going on among the peers, so that they cannot contact the classmates. And we've got the so-called technical aggression, where you can drop a virus or some malicious malware to someone. Those are all forms of cyber violence. And I'm talking about cyber violence and its forms here because a lot of those techniques require that the perpetrators know the victim. So, as opposed to the previous speaker, I wanted to talk about those forms of online violence where the perpetrators actually know the victim in the real world. They interact, they are classmates, group mates, and those are the contexts where violence emerges. So, in order for those violence forms to happen, the victims and perpetrators usually need to know one another in the real world. So I take cyberbullying very literally. So this is bullying by the peers, which takes place in the virtual world, and bullying is by definition intentional, so the perpetrators want to hurt somebody. It's repeatable. There is a characteristic imbalance between the perpetrators and the victim. So when a group bullies one person, the person is clearly outnumbered then. What's also important, there is some passive or active involvement of the witnesses. The role of witnesses is extremely important here. Several years ago, when I was working at the Institute of Educational Studies, we were doing this extensive research about violence in Polish schools, and we have asked 528 school teachers, class supervisors, how widespread are various forms of cyberbullying. So cyberbullying, this online aggression, that's a category amounting to 12%. So this is something which was noticed by class supervisors at school, but it was quite rare. On the other hand, I would like you to remember what I said about the witnesses, what the children are witnessing. Do they really notice the violence? You know that the class supervisors, the teachers, they are adults. So they said that cyberbullying amounts to 12%. 25%. But when we asked 11,000 children, they said that this cyberbullying, depending on an individual schools, that was 25 to 29% of cases. And the question was just about the last 4 weeks. So we didn't ask them, have you ever witnessed or been subject to cyberbullying? Have you ever had such an experience? We asked about the last 4 weeks. This study is several years old, so we have also middle schools in here, but I think this also shows us the age distribution. If we looked at the younger and older students in primary schools nowadays. So the peak of cyberbullying was at the late primary school, so 7th or 8th grade primary school, or the 1st grade in high school. So 7 to 8% of the people experience that every day. That's quite a realistic picture of what's going on. Maybe it's even more common nowadays. And now I wanted to go back to the role of witnesses once again. I think technically you know this cycle of violence, but I wanted to stress how important in the context of group violence is the dynamics of witnesses. There aren't too many aggressors. The aggressors are not a dominant group. This whole theater of violence that we are seeing online is actually directed to the witnesses, to the people who will read the posts, who will like them, who will follow them, who will reshare them, who will extend the ranges. This all is done to achieve a success. And success here is understood as a digital applause. Like at school, everybody would laugh and they would say, yeah, good punch, buddy. Online, they would like it, they would share it, repost it. So those witnesses are actually fueling the violence. If the witnesses started to go the other way, if they understood what their role was, if they understood that the message is directed to them by the aggressors, that they demand their attention, they are looking forward to their likes, to their reposting, if the witnesses stopped doing that, if they started supporting the victims, cyberbullying would disappear. Of course, this is not my recipe to get rid of cyber violence. I'm not as naive to think this could happen, that if we stop looking at those groups, the cyberbullying will disappear. In a perfect world, that would be the case. Okay, so what's the intervention that we can take? What can we do? How do we help? How do we support the groups which are subject to cyberbullying? First of all, we can think of some interventions which might be divided into hot and cold. This is also true for some school contexts. So if we have two students who break up a fight, as a teacher, I have to start this hot intervention, so separate them right away, limit the violence. But also it would be very good if the school could take some cold interventions which are planned, which are done calmly, when the school has some structure, some scheme how to react to violence, and they would react accordingly. In terms of cyberbullying, those hot intervention strategies would be recommended to the people who are subject to cyberbullying, who are the victims. I have shown you that this proportion in the perception of cyber violence between the teachers and the students at school. So this is where the violence usually, if the violence occurs in the real world, then the teachers have a chance to intervene. But in the digital world, it's actually not visible because it happens in the mobile phones, it happens in some closed groups, so the teachers don't see it. And those hot interventions have to be taken up by the victim, by the student. What we can do is to educate, to explain, to tell them to collect evidence, to report it, to try to secure your data, have some strong passwords in place. You can find a number of those advice very easily online. So it's about self-assistance, self-management techniques, because it's hard to expect from teachers that they will monitor the internet all the time and they will provide those hot assistance techniques to their students. It is possible, but this is difficult and has a high cost, as we know. So that's the first part of my advice. And secondly, I wanted to talk about these cold intervention techniques where an educator consciously supports a class or a peer group to prevent violence. But also, if you want to do that effectively, you need to be able to learn that those cases are actually taking place. So I wanted to tell you about a project that we do in the SWPS University. It's actually been completed. It was a 2-year project, and we have designed an app. We thought that if the cyberbullying is happening online, then we can create an app that's going to support the anti-violence behaviors. So RESQL application works like that the students can download the mobile app, and using it, they can report to a teacher cases of cyberbullying, and they can do it completely anonymously. They could say that somebody is excluded and that the class is actually rallying up to get on somebody, to disrespect them online, mistreat them online. This application also RESQL allows the student and teacher to exchange short text information. Very often when I discuss this information, the teacher says, well, this is anonymous, so we're going to be flooded with fake reports, or the students are going to send us some strange messages. I wanted to assure you that so far, in several dozens of schools, we actually didn't have any, or we had hardly any problems of sending those fake reports or strange messages. This problem actually does not exist.
Sometimes a person sends just one message in order to verify whether there is any reaction, but they do not continue with a proper conversation. We also had workshops with young people. I conducted these workshops. Well, we talked about the app and we role-played. Young people told me why there are no jokes. They told me that they feel someone finally took care of the problem. When they see an app like that, an app that can help them, they feel that joking about it is not appropriate, because finally there is a tool to get help. Surprisingly, the students treat this app very seriously. On the other hand, the app won't solve each and every problem. It's just a means of safely getting information across to the teacher, and the teacher needs to take some actions. I would like to discuss these potential actions.
interwencji, które są
I won't delve into too many details,
na dyscyplinę,
but
na wsparcie,
in general, we have actions based on discipline, support, mediation,
metody
joining a support group, etc., etc.
podstawowych metod programu.
So there are those basic methods and then methods that derive from the general ones, the basic ones.
Zapobiegania przemocy.
All in all, there are different actions that we can undertake from the level of school, on the level of school, sorry, in order to prevent violence, cyber violence. What can we do? First of all, support the victims of violence. This approach
Takim systemowym, ogólnoszkolnym zapobiegania
on a general school level,
dziecko może samo
we assume that a child can actively learn to protect himself or herself from bullying in offline and online worlds.
w taki sposób, żeby mogła poradzić sobie.
We can support the victims in order for the victim to be able to
Czasem podejściem
manage the problem on their own. It is quite controversial because this approach does not take into account or does not encourage to
przez pedagogów,
punish the attacker.
a przekłada ją
So the energy that teachers would put into punishing the attacker is placed in supporting the victim.
BHP, posługiwania się internetem to jedno.
For instance, via safely browsing through internet.
Czytać to, co
What else do we teach? We teach how to read certain communications, how to read irony, how to use language
w internecie. Wszystko to
in order not to become a victim in the internet.
wybrana właśnie na ofiarę, jeśli sobie nie radzi.
In general, we teach skills that would prevent someone from becoming a victim
Nie jest taka płynna,
by teaching certain soft skills or using a given language
w tych sytuacjach agresji znajdować, a my
in order to prevent aggression against a certain person.
właśnie pewność siebie, pozytywną
We support
poczucie skuteczności.
confidence, the positive sense of belonging. We also, as I've said, reinforce certain skills
Ofiarami różnych form
in people who can become victims of different types of violence. We teach
na
techniques.
przykład takiej techniki restrukturyzacji,
For instance, a technique of
zaczepek, niskich kompetencji.
cognitive
Tutaj widzę, że
restructuring,
więc jakby tych technik nie będę.
and many other that I won't delve into the details of.
Narzędzia komunikacyjne, które są znane, które
These are communicative tools that are well known, well taught during different sorts of workshops, and this is also what we can teach our kids
tego typu zaczepkami.
in order to protect them from violence, as I've said.
Oczywiście też treningi sprawności fizycznej, tak żeby
We also engage kids in trainings, in physical
radzić.
activities, trainings,
O problemy w tym podejściu.
and many other.
Często to są osoby o niskim poziomie kompetencji i rzeczywiście niełatwo jest
Quite frequently, people who become victims of cyber violence do not have adequate competences.
psychologiczne.
They also have problems with their mental health, or they come from families with quite low
Jeśli to zrobimy,
social capital or social resources.
w zapobieganiu przemocy.
So this is quite successful. What we're doing is quite
Druga
successful,
forma
actually.
wsparcia, która wydaje się sensowna, to
Another form of support
wsparcia.
lies in groups, in support groups.
Kategoria tych metod nieobwiniających,
These are methods that do not rely on blaming,
nie też szybkiego zadośćuczynienia za
and therefore reconciliation governs governs these methods instead of getting something from the attacker. In other words, a group is encouraged to solve a certain problem, and the group does not have to include the victim. A teacher presents problem to a certain group, namely he or she says, look, someone is systematically excluded in the internet from certain talks or activities. Let's talk about what that gives the group, what is the group dynamic, what happens in the classroom, do we create a positive ambience, are we happy being members of such a group where someone is excluded? Perhaps not. What can we do in order to prevent such situations? Think about it, find solutions. I put it on you, I count you would be able to solve the problem. What could you do? These methods are being used in an experimental way in Polish schools, and they actually are quite successful. Quite frequently, there is a smaller group within the larger one, pioneers, so to speak, who want to change the dynamic of the classroom, and they actively encourage other members of the group to include the excluded victim. This is a very interesting method because the teacher actually is not involved in punishing. Energy is put into supporting a healthy ambience of the classroom or the school. I mentioned only 2 methods among the inexhaustive list that I told you about, because there are many different tools that you can use. I just wanted to give you some examples of techniques that can be used when it comes to cyberbullying. We believe that the app that we created can be beneficial and can support victims, especially that we can get testimonies via this app, because otherwise these testimonies would be, for instance, placed in closed groups and we wouldn't have access to that. Thank you so much. Should you have any questions, please write to me.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie doktorze. Proszę jeszcze pozostać.
Thank you so much. Please stay with me.
Myślę, że to również była
because we can have some questions. This was a very interesting presentation, especially methods that you presented, and I also could see interest in the app. Now, are there any questions?
Jedną panią.
Dzień dobry, czy aplikacja jest płatna?
Is the app, do you have to pay for the app, and how do you access school code?
W międzyczasie pani już zaczęła sprawdzać.
Well, I can see that you started using the application, and there is a school code.
RESQL, będący podmiotem, oferuje...
RESQL, namely the RESQL app.
Muszę powiedzieć, żeby aplikacja sama była płatna, to jakby wdrożenie systemu w szkole jest płatne.
It gives you the code, the app itself is free, but introducing the system to a school is what you pay for.
Jest coś o
It's not a complete freeware. But you can find prices on the webpage. Are there any questions?
Jeszcze tam mamy 100.
Za głos. Mam takie pytanie odnośnie tych metod.
Thank you. My question is about your methods. Do you conduct trainings?
Były dwie wspomniane.
You mentioned 2 methods of support.
Prowadzimy,
Yes.
łatwiej powiedzieć, to znaczy będąc jakby tutaj w tym zespole RESQL-owym osobą merytoryczną,
Being responsible for content in our team,
proszą szkolenia z metod
I know
prewencji,
that sometimes schools are interested in methods related to group dynamics, interventions, etc. So we do conduct trainings that are not directly related to the app.
Tak. One dzieją się.
So the trainings do take place.
Czy jeszcze ktoś z Państwa jest chętny do zadania pytania?
Do you have any other questions?
Nie widzę. Pięknie dziękujemy.
Thank you so much.
Dziękuję bardzo, doktorze.